Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to be here in the house of God and be able to think and study on the Lord's Supper and the time of the season that's going to be happening. I wanted to narrow my thinking into one day in particular, but it's a little hard to not tell something of before and after on the one day. But there's a number of charts around that are very interesting. This one here somebody could write and ask for, and we can reproduce this either in 14-inch paper or in 8.5 by 11, or just on your tablets and on your emails, and charts of what happened each day at the time of Jesus' death. And actually, this follows. It's interesting. This year, the Lord's Supper was on Tuesday night, which was when Jesus ate it in his day on Tuesday night, because Wednesday was the high day. But all night they went through the problem of justice and judgment and sentencing and all of that sort of thing. And then he was killed Wednesday afternoon, and evening was when he died. And then you have the 3 days and 3 nights, which is on here. You'd have Thursday night, that side, because night becomes first, and then the day. The evening and morning were the first day. Evening comes first, night comes first, and then the day. So you'd have the Wednesday night, the Thursday night, and Friday night, which is, days before. So then you'd have Thursday in the daytime, Friday in the daytime, Saturday in the daytime. The night part was already spoken of. It's the day before. The 24 hours period starts with the night and then the day. So then 3 days and 3 nights, Jesus was in the grave. And Saturday afternoon would be the end of the 72 hours. And he came out of the grave late Saturday afternoon, and the sun was setting. The beginning of the first day of the week, when the sun was setting Saturday afternoon. Okay, that's a lot of information to process all in one go. But it helps if you have this kind of a chart to get you through some of those things, and similar charts. I don't even know if I put that in here, probably I didn't. But there's all kinds of charts and things that you can look at. I remember one that's got a yellow page and red on it. I don't think I put it in here. Maybe I did. I did. So this could be reproduced as well. You can see the night first, and then the day, and the night, and then the day, and the night, and the day, and the night, and the day, to tell what was happening each day. And that's what this is as well. It's also in Brother Wesley Walker's book, similar crafting of the page, and the dark area is grayed so that you can see where the night was. So in the 24-hour period of, say, Thursday, you have the light part, and you say, oh, that's easy to, there's the gray over there. Yep, that's the evening first, the night first, and then the day. And then you can see exactly Friday afternoon what was happening. So I know I got more than I need here, but that might help us to go through some of this. There's also charts in some Bibles, like this sort of a chart. And it's a chronological Bible. So you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. On each statement of what was happening this day and that day and that day and that day, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And sometimes John didn't mention this, or Matthew, Mark, and Luke didn't mention about the foot washing, but John did. And it'll show you in those charts. Everybody can get those fairly easily. They're available, or you can ask for them. And those are blessings to have, to be able to coordinate some of the faster thinking, whatever. You can take it down a notch and follow those things. So let me see what else I've been thinking on and directing this. One of the thoughts that comes right away when you start this sermon, this type of work, the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew calendar, and the time frame that they were in, how the clock was determined in their day, with the hours of the night and the hours of the day. And Jesus said there's 12 hours in the day, and so on. And the night is past, and so on. You need to know something about how their calendars work and how their nights worked. Their calendar was lunar calendar. It was following the moon. So with the moon coming around every so often, they had to determine, well, God said to them when they were going to come out of Egypt, so it's in Exodus, 12, Exodus chapter 12, and the first 7 verses or so. It right away starts off about Aaron and Moses, so that you know the time frame when it is. And then the second verse says, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months, and it shall be the first month of the year to you." So God set this up. They'd already been doing these things for years and years and following the moon and so on. And so he said, okay, this is how it's going to work from now on. Well, the new moon, when you think of new moon, you think, oh boy, maybe that's the full moon. No, it's the other way around. When the sun is setting in the west, that direction for us here, when it gets close, the moon gets smaller and smaller, and then one day you can't see the moon. It's right in with the sun, and you can't visually see it, so you have to wait another day, and then all of a sudden there's this little tiny crescent moon, and it's only there for an hour or so, and then it's gone, again over the horizon. That is the new moon. And in this case here, they were to take that first seeing of the moon, and they were supposed to count 14 days. But 10 days they would do this, and then on the 14th day they would have the Passover. So in here it says this will be the first month, and they called that month Abib. And God calls it Abib, and later also they added another section where they called it by a little different name, but it mentions it that it's a new moon. Nisan and Abib are the two. And you can look these up in various books of the Bible, like Esther and Nehemiah, and even chapter 13 here in this Exodus, where it mentions the first month in verse 18. So you want to do some reading in Exodus chapter 12 to get those months kind of figured out as to where they were. The months were 28 days, basically. They do move slightly more than that, so I guess 7 times in 19 years they had to add an extra month. Whereas somebody came along later with the Gregorian calendar and the Roman calendar and so on, different countries. As they came across those, they gave different lengths of months, trying to beat it so that it would come out even. I think God had fun with that because 365 doesn't divide by anything. It divides by 1 and it divides by 365. That's pretty neat. So the setup of this was they were to get the congregation together and to pick out a lamb, keep it for 10 days, and if the lamb was still in good health and so on, then they would keep it till the 14th day and kill it in the evening. That's down in verse 6. Verse 6, on the 14th day they were to kill it in that evening. So the Passover here was to protect them from the death, we sometimes refer to it as death angel, but it was God's messenger that was destroying the Egyptian firstborn, and it was not going to happen to the Hebrew people. So they were very concerned about the date, to hang on to that date and keep it safe. All the years from then all the way through, hundreds of years, they kept that date. And so when Jesus was here, he was looking for the Passover. And on such and such a day, the Passover was arriving, and they had to make ready for the Passover, the eating of the lamb, the bitter herbs and things. Well, while they were doing that, he started a new process for us. So I want to get to that. But just in a moment here, I'm going to make sure I catch up with what I was saying. Calendar is a big thing. Oh, the hours of the day. They didn't have the grandfather's clock or so on. They did with candles or with sundials and so on to do the daylight hours. And even at Jesus' time, they were using candles mainly. Certain diameter, certain length, certain kind of wick, certain content of the wax would cause it to burn that much per hour. so that you can figure out what is the first 4 hours of the night, or the second 4 hours, the first watch and the second watch, and so on, of the night. So when you're reading in the New Testament and you're reading about timings of the day and timings of the night, think of those things. Also, the lamb being killed, I talked about that. For hundreds of years they were doing this. The 24 hours in a day from sundown to the following sundown is 24 hours. You've got the night part and the day part, but it's still 24 hours because that is to do with the Earth's rotation around the sun and the rotation of the Earth as well for the 24 hours, but also the place in the, if you have the sun here and the Earth going around, things change for the year. Okay. So not a big problem, just got to think what it was like in their day, put ourselves there. You'll be looking at things with the disciples and so on in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which I wrote myself a note here. The emblems, when the emblems were taken and what it was looking like. So I guess I could do that first here because I want to move on to a little different thought later. But if you look in Matthew 26, Matthew chapter 26 is one part of the feast, or the start of the feast. As in Matthew 26, you want to do quite a bit of reading there. I got a paper in here for Mark, and that would be I got Matthew 28 will come up later. In Mark chapter 14, you'll notice also the same thing. In chapter 14, verse 22 through 26 is talking about Jesus instituting the bread and the juice, unleavened bread, unleavened juice, for the representation of his body and his blood, and how we are to take it to remember him. And then we could go to Luke chapter 22, and you'd have the same thing. Luke 22, you might want to read all the way from verse 7 to, way down there to about 24, 23. Really good reading. And where would you find the foot washing? So let's go to John chapter 13. The others don't tell about the foot washing. And I'm going to tell the story rather than reading all of this. So bear with me and follow along from even verse 1 in John 13. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. He will not give up his love for us and of keeping us and concerned about us. But the supper being ended, he was eating the Passover with his disciples. You'd have to go back in some of those verses and find where Jesus sent out a command to go and make ready for the Passover. Go and talk to this man, he'll show you the upper room and make ready for the Passover. We don't know of other people there except the 12, plus Jesus. Didn't appear to be any servants or serving people. Doesn't appear to be any women there, because later, of course, the women were involved in the very first book of Acts, very first part of Acts, and the first chapter of Acts, where the women were there as well, and probably 120 people were there. Where here, it seems to be just the 12. So the supper being ended, he was eating the Passover meal. And Judas had already been bothered by Satan, and Judas was planning to do what he was going to do. He was going to betray Jesus for money. So Jesus, in verse 4, he rises from supper. That's the ordinary Passover meal that they were eating. He rose from that. And it doesn't mention a thing about the emblems in John. So you have to kind of do this piece by piece and what comes first and what's second. It's not too hard to figure out. But he rose and he washed the disciples' feet. And of course, the story of him coming to Peter and Peter saying, "Oh no, you don't do that. You're my Lord and Master." And he said, "If I don't wash you, you're not part of me. And he says, okay, yeah, wash my hands and my feet and my head. And, he was all in at that time, all ready for serving Jesus. And then Jesus says, I'm your Lord and Master, about verse 13. But look what I've done. I've shown you something that I want you to remember and that you should do it. And it's an example in verse 15 that he wants us to do the foot washing service. And it's in red letters, it's Jesus talking, that we need to do that as part of the service. So when we first arrive at church, we usually think on that evening, we should do the foot washing first. We're not going to have the lamb and the bitter herbs and all the other things that went with it, because we're thinking only of the things that Jesus wanted us to remember him by. So we take the time right at the beginning. When they used to come into a building, somebody washed their feet. Well, here there was nobody. The 12 didn't offer to wash feet, and Jesus evidently not neither. And so when he was there, and he started this, he showed them the foot washing should be there while he was eating the Passover meal. And then he said, happy are ye if you do these things, in verse 17. We need to learn from that and do that. Then Judas was still there. Some people don't know when Judas left. Well, read these 4 books, those little verses in those 4 books, and find out where Judas was. That's always something interesting. In this book, John, Jesus says there's somebody that's going to betray me. And they started saying, is it you? Is it you? And, hey, tell John to ask, So John was the youngest one. And so then Jesus said, well, the one that I give the sop to, evidently this is a bit of bread that they would dip in a gravy-like or a soupy type material. They dip it so it would be softer. And he gave it to Judas Iscariot. And Satan entered him in verse 27. At that point, he was sold for and given to do it. So he took the sop and immediately went out. And there was a little discussion as to why he was going, but he went out into the night in verse 30. So I'm going to jump back to my other notes so that we can follow along with what was happening at this time for the whole group, what was going on. I'm going to move some of these papers. There we go, now I can follow this. So what I really want to do is have a combination of this time chart with what was happening each day, but I don't want to go back to the triumphant entry into the city on Sabbath. Other charts don't do that way because they're not starting over here correctly on when Jesus rose from the grave. And Sunday, they're not going back the right number of days. So if you took the scriptures and looked up these verses, which I can't take that much time right now, you would walk back and find out that the triumphant entry into the city was on Sabbath. Wow, that makes sense. For the king to enter the Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. Then it says on the next day this happened, like the cursing of the fig tree, and then the fig tree dried up. The next day was dried. And then the reserving of the upper room was on Tuesday. On Wednesday night, when they were eating the Passover, and Jesus instituted his new things. And then immediately they went out into the Garden of Gethsemane. And that's a wonderful story to read as well about what happened in the Garden of Gethsemane. So if I take these charts, this is a fast go around on this circle of 24 hours. But the events that were preceding was the foot washing, the Last Supper, when he tells and gives the bread to them and says, this is my body, if the bread is my body, remember me. And then he took the cup and gave them the juice and he said, remember me, this is the blood of the New Testament. Then they went out to the Garden of Gethsemane, and it wasn't long that you can read about the prayers where Jesus' blood, his sweat was so large it was like blood. The viscosity of the two, I guess, water is pretty thin, the viscosity of one, and the blood is heavier. This water was heavier. I don't know, the Bible doesn't say that he bled from his pores, sweat pores. Some think he did. Well, leave it up to them, whichever. It was serious. That's the thought that we need to get on. That it was very serious to Jesus, and it was a serious act to die for the sins of mankind. Then Jesus was arrested. There's a whole good story about that, about Peter trying to save Jesus and Jesus having to heal a boy in front of everybody. You know, the servant gets healed. And they still go on with their same stuff that they were doing instead of saying, this is the Messiah, you know. Isn't the situation different than a standard person that's been bad? No, they didn't get that. So Jesus was taken to the high priest Caiaphas and was tried there, you might say, and then he was sent over to Pilate in Mark 15 and Luke and so on. He was the Roman governor, and he decides, no, I don't really want to do this. Somewhere along the way, you'd find that verse where his wife tells him, leave this guy alone. You know, I've had dreams about this. You leave him alone. Anyway, he sends him over to Herod. He's got an excuse that Herod's in town, and he's really the overseer over this bigger area. He's a governor as well. And he said, I'll give him to Herod. Well, that's in Luke 23. So Herod didn't want part of this neither. He's, you know, I'm on vacation or something. Let me out of here. Anyway, he decides that he doesn't want to be bothered with this. I'm going to send him back to Pilate. So in Luke 23, he gets sent back to Pilate. And Pilate tries and tries to get Jesus off. He said he's done nothing wrong. He has a communication with Jesus, and he thinks maybe if I beat him and bring him out that he's been beaten, maybe then they'll let him off, you know, they'll let him go. And the challenge was, well, do you want Barabbas? Is somebody supposed to be let loose from prison in these days? Do you want Barabbas? Or do you want Jesus? Oh, we want Barabbas. You know, let Barabbas be set free. And, well, what are you going to do with him? Well, crucify him. Oh, boy, and they all started hollering, crucify him. So Jesus is sentenced in Luke 23, verse 23. That's 23. It's kind of neat to know. And read the 24th verse there as well. But Jesus is sentenced, and then he's led to Calvary after a whole story there of him being beaten and mocked by the military, and that he could hardly walk, I guess, and they saw that he couldn't carry the cross, and he's done without food for hours and hours now, and no water. He's pretty spent. So they saw this Simon of Cyrene. They compelled him to carry Jesus' cross for him. That's in Matthew 27 and Mark 15. And being led to Calvary is in Luke 23, verse 26. And then they crucified him. And you know, this was not a gentle thing. They had this big post that was probably 4 by 4, 6 by 6, probably 8 by 8, pretty large. And when they dropped him in, when they nailed him to this post and then stand it upright and drop it into a hole, it was probably 2.5 feet, 3 feet deep, so that they wouldn't pull out very easily. That was not an interest, not a act that you could live through. It was just a miserable situation. But they crucified him. And that was somewhere around 9 in the morning by this time. 9 in the morning. Oh, did I get to 9 a.m.? I had 9 a.m. that he was crucified at 9 a.m. Because they'd been doing this all night long. And around 9, I'll say 9 a.m. when they crucified him, so that it'll match with the next thing that's going to happen, because when you get up to noon, it was dark for 3 hours. In the middle of the day, it was dark for 3 hours, the middle of the day. So just going again quickly through this list of things, then the soldiers divided his clothing in Mark 15, so you'd want to read Mark and Luke and John there. And the people were hurling insults at him. while he was on the cross. And then there was the priests came by and mocked him as well while he was on the cross. And the soldiers then were mocking him, saying, if you're king, bring yourself down, save yourself. One of the criminals hurled insults at Jesus. Aren't you the Christ? And, save yourself and us. And then the other criminal said, don't rebuke him, don't do this. We are being punished for our wrongdoing. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And then Jesus said that he would remember him. And Jesus said to his mother, Mother, this is your son. In other words, he was dying as the eldest of Mary's birth children. He wasn't going to be there. Mother, John will be your son to take care of you in your older age. That kind of communication. Here is your mother, he says to the disciple, here is your mother, and mother, here is your son. He was making that connection for her well-being. Then it says the 6th hour of the day in Mark 15:33, that at the 6th hour it became dark. He was on the cross already at that time. He was crucified, he was on the cross. Not dead, but he was on the cross. And it was dark for till the 9th hour, which is 3 in the afternoon by their time. And during the number of hours between sunrise and nighttime. So if I can pick up this here again, 3 hours. Jesus then, somewhere around the 7th hour, or when it was dark yet, he cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And a little bit further along, he said, I'm thirsty. And if you read that, it's when they brought him the vinegar, and he tasted it and then didn't receive any more from that. And then he said, it is finished, in John 19 and verse 30. And then, my Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit, in Luke 23. He says that. And he dies. Jesus dies. Around about 3 in the afternoon, which would be 9th hour of their clock, 9th hour of their time. There was a great earthquake, and the veil in the temple was torn. That veil was so thick. We think of a little lacy thing, but people have researched how it was built, how the veil curtain was made, and they say it was so many layers and so thick a cloth that it would take 2 oxen pulling that way, 2 oxen pulling this way to tear it, and it was tall. So it was God-given, not man-did. Man didn't tear it. Amen. Because that also ruined the ability to hold services from that moment onward. The Holy Spirit was gone. The veil, the holiest of holy was open. They had a major problem on their hands. They had to fix that before you can do anything else. So the tombs opened. Many people came from the grave, and Matthew 27. The centurion was just, whoa, what's happened here? He says, surely this man was the Son of God. The multitude began to confess the same thing. The thieves' legs were broken. The government, well, there's a story in there too, I'll just relate part of it, that the authorities of the church went to the government, the Roman government, and said, this guy said that in 3 days and 3 nights he's going to leave, he's going to escape, and he's going to rise again. He said, let's not let the disciples pull a trick on us and steal his body. So they asked for a guard to watch over the body and the gravesite, and they made that arrangement that it would be guarded. But when they came then, the government said, the church was asking, the church leaders were asking that these bodies don't stay on the cross during the high day Sabbath, which would start at sundown. Don't let these bodies stay here on the cross. We want them removed. So they came and broke the legs of the thieves, because that way they would die. They couldn't push themselves up and get air in their lungs. They were going to bleed more of the pain, they'd pass out, and then they'd just suffocate and die. And that was actually merciful if you look at it that way. And they came to Jesus and were going to do the same thing. But the Bible says, oh no, you don't break a bone of this. The Old Testament prophecies, don't break a bone of his. So they speared him in the side, and he didn't jump and wiggle. And he was dead. And out of his body came water and blood, which is unusual. This is a special meaning that was there. So then the burial had it happen, so they quickly got them down off of the cross. Whatever they did with the thieves, might have just thrown them over the hill because that was the garbage dump there anyway. But for Jesus, they talk about Joseph of Arimathea, and the other person came with blankets or cloths and wrapped them up and took them and put them into a tomb and secured it with a government guard and with a seal from the government so that nobody could steal away his body and say that he arose. Well, that didn't hold Jesus back. So 3 days and 3 nights go by. If I look at this chart very quickly here so that I don't run too long. But after he was crucified and put into the tomb, on Wednesday afternoon before sundown, he hurried to get him into the grave before that sun went down, because otherwise they would be doing work on the high day, just at the sundown change to the next day. So you have the night first, and then the day on Thursday. That's the first day for Jesus being in the tomb, and that was the high day Sabbath. Look that up, John 19:31. And then also the Friday came, night first, and then the day, and he was in the tomb. The women were preparing the spices because they couldn't buy them on the high day, and you don't buy them before the person dies. I mean, that doesn't make sense. But they couldn't buy them on the high day, so they bought them on Friday and had to cook them, brew them down in order to get the juices and the brew to bring and pour on the body. But they did that on Friday. Then Friday night, our time, would be the night beginning the Sabbath at sundown on Friday, which would be the third day. So this would be a third night first, and then the third day on Friday. And then you go, on Friday night is the beginning of the third day. And Saturday, our Friday night is always confusing going back and forth, isn't it? Our Friday night was the night part of the third day to be in the tomb. There we go. Okay. And then Saturday in the daylight was the third day. And at night, what happens then? He's finished the 72 hours. Well, look at Matthew. Matthew 28. He was a mathematician and he knew how to keep numbers. Matthew 28. In the end of the Sabbath, when is that? Saturday afternoon when the sun's going down.
Amen.
That's the end of the Sabbath. As it was dawning towards the first day of the week. We think of the word dawn sometimes as a beginning, but also an age, or the dawn of the age of Aquarius. That was when I was young. Whoops. But this was the dawning, the beginning part of the next day, when the sun was going down. Sun was setting, and Sunday was beginning. It says the dawn toward the first day of the week. The sun was setting, and the first day of the week was starting. In Hebrew, and Greek, if you look these up, I forget which now. Oh, that's not good. But it says in the end of the week, I guess that's Greek, end of the week, at the beginning of the next week. And I think, oh, now wait a minute, are we in trouble? No, we're not. That's actually Saturday afternoon. Exactly the same thing. The end of this previous week ends when the Sabbath ends.
Dawn means to begin.
And dawn is just meaning to begin of the next week. Mm-hmm. So that was Saturday evening when the sun was setting. Sunday was beginning. And what happened? Jesus was risen. Start reading this down there. The angel came and rolled back the stone. It doesn't say that's how Jesus got out. He didn't need to get out that way, right? And then it talks about the angel, and the keepers, the guards, were so scared they were shaking in their boots. They were shaken really badly, fell down like they were dead, in verse 4. And verse 5, the women were there to anoint the body and so on. The women were there. And they said, don't fear. I know that you're seeking Jesus. But he's not here. It's in verse 6. He's not here. He is risen. He didn't say, I just rolled a stone away so he could get out. He didn't need that at all. So it's come and see the place where the Lord laid. And then go quickly and tell the disciples, he is risen from the dead, and he's going to meet you all in Galilee area. And he said, run and tell the disciples. Well, these people ran back and forth, and you're thinking, how did they do it? Well, this was absolutely amazing miracle that had just happened. And I don't believe you, so I got to see for myself. So they would run up, and somebody else would run. And Peter ran, and John was able to run faster, and he passed him by. And interesting stories to read about. And they looked, and he was gone. So, and when Jesus talked with Mary, he said, don't touch me, I haven't been to my Father yet. Interesting, very interesting. Later he said, here, put your fingers in my hand. You want to see my side where they pierced me? And they could handle him, they could touch him. And he was there for many days. So this is the miracle and the story of Jesus being raised from the tomb. And his Lord's Supper that he left us, the message that we would keep those days and come and talk about those days and talk about the eating of the bread that represented his body, the eating and drinking of the juice that represented his blood, and remembering what he did for us, that he died on the cross for us, agonizing pain and horrible beatings and so on that he took for us. That was our punishment. We should have had that for the sins of ourselves. And Jesus took that punishment for us. Think on those things while you think of the Passover and the Lord's Supper and celebrating it this time of the year. May God bless you.